Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hello, and thank you for listening, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or by podcast, if that's how you go about it. I want to start today's show with this audio from 4 days ago on CNN. Here's Jim Acosta.
Unapologetic election denier in Colorado is facing the consequences from embracing the so-called big lie. Former Mesa County Clerk Tina Peters was sentenced to 9 years behind bars yesterday for a data breach scheme inspired by Trump's false claims of voter fraud. She allowed a man affiliated with MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell to misuse a security card to illegally access the county's election system. Before handing down the sentence, the judge in the case ripped into Peters for her blatant lies and taking advantage, he says, of her privileged position.
Your reputation at this point is poor because of what you've done here and after. Your lies are well documented, and these convictions are serious. I'm convinced you would do it all over again if you could. You're as defiant as a defendant as this court has ever seen. You don't have those histories of drug and alcohol abuse. There's no lifetime of trauma, not even close to the type of mitigating circumstances I would see from many folks who sit in that chair. No, to the contrary, Ms. Peters, you are a privileged person.
Yep.
You are as privileged as they come. There are many things in my mind that are crystal clear about this case. You are no hero, you abused your position, and you're a charlatan who used and is still using your prior position in office to peddle a snake oil that's been proven to be junk time and time again. In your world, it's all about you. You abdicated your position as a servant to the Constitution, and you chose you over all else. Yes, you are a charlatan, and you cannot help but lie as easy it is for you to breathe. You betrayed your oath for no one other than you.
So it was on the heels of that sentencing, and with all the shenanigans and confusing postures taken by the Georgia State Election Board, that the Coalition for Good Governance, in coordination with Free Speech for People, held a press briefing, a virtual press briefing yesterday that, to date, I don't see a whole lot of media coverage relaying what was shared in that press briefing yesterday afternoon. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to share it. So Free Speech for People and the Coalition for Good Governance, I'm reading off of their press release that came out yesterday before the briefing, hosted a press briefing on the coordinated multi-state plot directed and funded by attorneys and allies for Donald Trump to unlawfully take copies of voting software and share it with numerous unauthorized individuals. In this briefing, by the way, and again, I'm reading from the press release, they summarized the multi-state plot to take voting system software from key swing states, what they know about how it has been widely shared, how the software access can subvert elections, how the plot is connected to Donald Trump and his allies definitively, and how this scheme can impact election security and what could still be done to better safeguard the upcoming election, which we are now just 4 weeks away from. So on the panel were, the host was John Bonifer, the president of Free Speech for People, and joining was Marilyn Marks, friend of the show, frequent guest, returning champion from the Coalition for Good Governance. She, of course, is the executive director. Also, Dr. Philip Stark, a professor of statistics from Cal Berkeley, was on. Let's see, who else did we have? Dr. Richard DeMillo here from, he's the chair at the Department of Computing at Georgia Tech here in Atlanta. And returning champion guest of the show frequently, and a friend of the show, Susan Greenhall from Free Speech for People. She is their senior election security advisor. They led with a video that had been put together by Free Speech for People that sort of dramatizes but doesn't hyperbolize the threat.
If attorneys for Donald Trump hired operatives to break into voting machines to copy the voting software across multiple states, would you be concerned? While the country was still reeling from an attempted coup, on January 7, 2021, A team hired by Sidney Powell and Trump attorney Jesse Banal entered the elections office in Coffee County, Georgia, to unlawfully copy the vote counting software used across the entire state. The scheme was caught on surveillance footage. This wasn't an isolated incident.
What were you trying to do with those tabulators?
Copies of voting software were also taken unlawfully in Colorado, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona. In Fulton County, Pennsylvania, the local officials allowed similar unauthorized access in 2020, paid for by Sidney Powell. And the plot continued in 2021 and 2022. The shocking thing is, they didn't just take the software. It was put on a share file site and covertly shared with a network of Trump supporters and election deniers that tried to overturn the 2020 election. Software taken in Colorado was also posted during a meeting of election deniers hosted by My Pillow guy Mike Lindell.
Allies of Trump succeeded in copying the election software.
Even more chilling, testimony obtained by the January 6th committee suggests the plot to take voting system software was discussed with Donald Trump. Even though there's ample evidence that this was a coordinated conspiracy by Trump allies to obtain election system software from multiple states, there have only been a couple of limited local efforts to investigate and charge these crimes.
My message to the Secretary of State, we need justice, that's why we need to talk it down.
There has been no federal effort to investigate the coordination across state lines to take voting software, or to track with whom the software has been shared, or to try to get the software back, or to federally charge those that were caught red-handed breaking into voting machines.
Unreal.
We have to act now. Call your senators and Congress members and demand they back a federal investigation into Trump allies' software breaches. The scheme to unlawfully copy voting system software poses serious threats to election security, but can still be stopped if we act now.
So after sharing that 3-minute video, Susan Greenhall from Free Speech for People addressed the media.
So we know that the software was taken in 2020, and that the plan was to use it to try to overturn the election in 2020. We should absolutely be expecting that this ill-gotten software is going to be used to challenge or undermine the elections in November, because we're seeing it already being used in efforts to challenge elections or overturn the election. So specifically, Carrie Lake, whose name may be familiar, she ran for governor in Arizona, filed a cert petition to overturn her 2022 loss for the governor's seat, using an affidavit that was authored by somebody who was central to all of these breaches, and using his analysis of the software as the technical basis for their lawsuit to try to overturn her loss. Their cert petition was dismissed, but I think we can expect to see this more. Just last week, the DeKalb County, Georgia Republican Party filed a lawsuit to challenge the voting system there and seek certain relief before the November election. They also used affidavits from people central to these breaches, using their analyses of the software that they've taken, admitting that they had the software that we know has been taken without authorization, and using that as the basis for their legal challenges in Georgia, in this most recent legal challenge in Georgia. But as we mentioned in this video, there is still no evidence of a federal investigation, and that one is being conducted anywhere. We've seen a few localized state investigations, most notably in Colorado. The investigation and prosecution of Tina Peters resulted in 9 years for her part in permitting software to be taken in Colorado. The AG in Michigan has brought 2 cases regarding the software, but we know that there are additional ones. But what these investigations are missing is the ability to sort of zoom out and see how all of these people are connected and how they may be working together, because We know that they are. It's the same group of people, the same cohort of people that are involved in all of these different state breaches. Names that may be familiar, like Doug Logan, who is involved in the audit in Arizona, Sidney Powell, of course, Stephanie Lambert, Phil Waldron, but also other people whose names may not be so familiar, like Conan Hayes, who was the guy that Tina Peters let into her office and copy the software so that it would end up at a cyber symposium with the MyPillow guy, Mike Lindell. He was implicated as a co-conspirator, but not charged. And we know that he received copies of the software that was taken in Fulton County, Pennsylvania, as well as Coffee County, Georgia. As well as multiple places in Michigan, and other localities. And there's but at the same time, even though there was extensive unauthorized access in Fulton County, Pennsylvania, there is no criminal investigation whatsoever in Pennsylvania. And in Georgia, the state investigation was analyzed to be badly inadequate by Anna Bauer, who unfortunately could not join us today. But she has done some incredible reporting and investigation into that. And what we found was that the Georgia State AG's office has done a very bad job of investigating this. They relied almost entirely on the evidence that was produced during the civil litigation, the Curling case, and did not do much of their own investigation. And it's more than 2 years now, and the state has not charged anyone, even though the breaches were caught on camera. So another consequence of not having a comprehensive investigation is we don't know where else there might be breaches. But we are continuing to see evidence that suggests that there might be. And that's why today Free Speech for People sent a demand letter to Ware County, Georgia, to demand it turn over a public record, which appears to confirm that the county allowed the Trump campaign to access its election equipment in late 2020, and that the county and its attorneys have refused to turn over the record, apparently trying to conceal it. And it's worth noting that the attorneys in Ware County are the same attorneys for Coffee County, which failed to turn over their records of the Coffee County breach for quite some time.
So we have so much more audio from this press briefing yesterday that we're going to share. We should have a few minutes to actually speak with Susan Greenhalgh from Free Speech for People as well to wrap this up. We'll also, if we have time, do our best to catch you up on what the state election board did yesterday, what went on at their most recent eyebrow-raising state election board meeting. Pretty heady stuff to discuss today on The Ron Show with just 4 weeks to go before Election Day. Here on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. There will be a healthy dose of show notes for you today if you're following along by listening to The Ron Show on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. When we podcast, I give you all of those notes and a link to listen back if you need to at ronshowatl.com. So Free Speech for People, Coalition for Good Governance, media press briefing yesterday laying out the multi-state and thus should be a federal investigation that they have dived into to tie together all the loose ends that show a coordinated effort to use voter software to try and not only overturn the 2020 election, but perhaps, I'd say perhaps, utilize it to litigate the 2024 election as well. We're going to dive right back into some of the audio we had. Dr. Richard DeMillo is the chair at computing at Georgia Tech. Here's Susan Greenhalgh introducing him.
But I'd like to turn this over to Rich DeMillo so he can talk a little bit more from the cybersecurity aspect of how the software can be used in the coming election.
Great, thank you, Susan. So let me break this down into four things that I think are top of mind when cybersecurity experts think about this kind of disclosure. First of all, and maybe the most obvious thing is that with public disclosure of the software and all the supporting systems, anyone who wanted to understand how the system worked would have a roadmap to do that. You would know the structure of the data and the databases that were being manipulated. You would know the logic of the algorithms. depending on the sophistication of the person that was doing the analysis, you would know how to mount these systems and make them run in a kind of a petri dish of an election environment. I'll come back to that point, but I can't overstate the danger that you are in when you release this kind of information to the public. That aside, let me say that the systems that we're talking about, although they have security problems, have design problems, were not designed for this kind of disclosure. They were designed with the idea that information would be kept secret. They hard code information into the systems that would normally be managed by a cybersecurity key management protocol that doesn't exist. So the whole conception of how these systems are going to be used and protected is damaged when you release it outside of any of these parameters. That's something that the principals in this matter recognize. Dominion, when asked this question in May, I'll read you the Dominion response. So Dominion's response is that releasing Dominion's intellectual property to an unaccredited, biased, and plainly unreliable actor such as Cyber Ninjas, which is who they were complaining about, causing irreparable damage to the commercial interests of the company and the election security interests of the country. So Dominion knew that this would be a catastrophe, would be a national security catastrophe. We've heard similar things from the Secretary of State's office, Chris Evans, when the subject was first brought up 4 years ago. The director of elections at that time said as much, that the Secretary of State's office protected this information because its release would be a catastrophe. The thing that you worry about when you see this kind of discussion, open discussion of software and software structure, is that making it available takes much of the risk out of the equation for a bad actor. So anyone who wanted to damage Georgia's election system has to go through a discovery process to figure out how they're going to do that. In cyber warfare terms, this is called reconnaissance. It's the highest cost thing that a bad actor does. Well, when you release the structure of the software, you've taken all that cost out of the system. You make it easy for someone who wanted to penetrate the system to experiment. They can try things out. They'll be undetected because they can mount these systems on their own machines in their own laboratories and not be exposed. Finally, I think that even if you were unconvinced that a bad actor would actually take this information and act on it, what we're seeing today and what we've heard so far with the DeKalb GOP case is that someone who wanted to induce chaos in the process would use this kind of event to induce chaos. So whether or not the system was breached, the fact that it is now possible to pull up a YouTube video that has the DIY YouTube version of how you would go about getting into the system means that someone later down the line can turn back and say, well, you see, the system was insecure from the start. It decreases confidence in the system. There are many technical things we can go into if there's interest, but those are the four things that when I think about this, I'm most concerned about.
Meanwhile, the state election board, with its nothing to see there mantra, has decided instead that they want to send election monitors to kind of look over the shoulder at Fulton County, even though Fulton County has put together their own team of monitors and is asserting that the state election board has no legal authority to do that, filing a suit on Monday to do so, as a matter of fact. Oh, yeah, and wants to relitigate 2020 by looking at Fulton County data once again. In fact, in today's Atlanta Journal-Constitution, David Wickert and Mark Nisi, easy for me to say, report that state investigators have found errors during the county's manual audit and machine recount of the previous presidential election, but those mistakes didn't change the outcome in Fulton County, where Biden received 73% of the vote. According to the lawsuit filed in Fulton County Superior Court, Johnston, that's Janice Johnston, the state election board member, threatened to disavow the county if it did not accept monitors suggested by the board. In a subsequent email, Johnston proposed 8 monitors be added to the team already put together by Fulton County. Oh, but hang on. Among the 8 monitors she's suggesting, former Congressman Frank Ryan, who asked the state's congressional delegation not to recognize its electors in December 2020, and Heather Honey, a subcontractor in the Cyber Ninjas audit of the 2020 presidential election in Maricopa County, Arizona. She's also responsible for the false claim repeated by Trump that there were 205,000 more votes than you had voters in Pennsylvania. Good choices. This is The Ron Show.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
By the way, I should mention, when we're talking about voting data breaches and challenges to voter registrations and election security, Fair Fight Action sent out a statement yesterday, by the way, that a new analysis from TargetSmart, a data and analytics firm, reveals that far-right election denier activists are using incomplete, unreliable data to challenge thousands of Georgians' freedom to vote. The data fueling the voter challenges comes from the outdated sources that often provide inaccurate information, raising serious concerns about the integrity of their claim. The mass voter challenges, often based on national change of address data and questionable sources like obituaries, business addresses, and phone numbers scraped from Google search results, seem designed to plant seeds of doubt about the 2024 election's legitimacy. I'm reading from their press release yesterday. With Georgia already employing aggressive list maintenance protocols, removing over 348,000 voters between October 2023 and September of 2024, including over 100,000 voters since the start of 2024, these mass voter challenges are unnecessary and harmful. You know what? I can speak to this from a, secondhand point of view. My friend Ludwig, who I, on this very show, celebrated his becoming an American citizen, also became a registered voter, has voted, I believe, in 2 different elections, one being a primary, another, I think, being something either state or local, has gone back to the My Voter page on the Secretary of State's website to make sure that he is still registered vote, and come to find that he doesn't show up. That's right. He has a voter registration card, and now he goes online to see that he cannot vote. He has re-registered again. For some background, the Secretary of State's office erected this website where folks can go on and unregister themselves, you would think, but with just a few simple details, can be unregistered by nefarious ne'er-do-wells. Well, my friend Ludwig, a registered voter, now doesn't show on his My Voter website page as being a registered voter, despite the fact that he was a registered voter after becoming an American citizen, has the card to go vote. I mean, he's probably going to have to go and ask for a provisional ballot, but he has re-registered since, so fingers crossed he'll be registered when he shows up to vote this November. These things are actually happening. These are real stories. Additionally, now, Free Speech for People has sent a letter to Ware County, Georgia, demanding attorneys turn over evidence of yet another possible voting system breach by the Trump campaign. I'm reading from their release yesterday. Representing Free Speech for People, American Oversight and Kaplan Cobb sent a demand letter today to Hall Booth Smith, PC, attorneys for Ware County, Georgia, also Coffee County, by the way, demanding production of a public record that appears to confirm the Trump campaign infiltrated the county's voting system in late 2020. The demand letter seeks a record attached to text messages produced at trial in the civil litigation Curling versus Raffensperger that appears to confirm the Trump campaign's unlawful access to the county's voting equipment. Free Speech for People, American Oversight, and Kaplan Cobb are not parties to that litigation. The texts show a conversation between HBS attorney for Ware County, Tony Rowell, and Blake Voiles, discussing reports that the Trump campaign had taken a voting system from Ware County. Voiles is a resident of neighboring Coffee County, where Trump operatives unlawfully accessed voting equipment over several days in early 2021. Voiles is shown on surveillance camera footage to be present during one of the unauthorized security breaches. Rowell and HBS represent both Ware and Coffee counties. In the text messages, Voiles sent Rowell a post from social media reporting allegations that the Trump campaign obtained a voting system from Ware County and asked Rowell if he may be able to verify the report. Rowell responded, "I will verify." 2 days later, Rowell sent Voiles an attachment labeled Ware County Confirmation.jpg, accompanied by the message, "Call me T." Free Speech for People has sought the attachment through Georgia's open records law since February 2024. Representing Ware County, HBS has refused to provide the attachment, claiming that it's private communication between Rowell and Voiles in Rowell's capacity as a private citizen. Back to yesterday's Free Speech for People and Coalition for Good Governance press briefing. One of their experts, Dr. Philip Stark, is a professor from the Department of Statistics at Cal Berkeley, asked if there's anything, or if there's even time still, for the state of Georgia to do anything to protect the integrity of the 2024 election.
So my list is much like yours. I want to start by echoing some of what Professor DeMello said, which is, to some extent, these vulnerabilities aren't new. What these disclosures do is democratize the ability to develop attacks. Certainly nation states had this information before, but now pretty much anybody with some commodity hardware can build an exact replica of the voting systems and practice attacks on them with no fear of getting caught until they've developed something that they might want to mount. Moreover, it makes it obvious to the world just how poor the cybersecurity of these systems is. That said, the fundamental vulnerabilities haven't really changed, and therefore the mitigations that could mitigate, that could help are really the same. And they are hand-marked paper ballots for the vast majority of voters, with ballot marking devices reserved for those who benefit from a more accessible interface, although it isn't more accessible for everybody. Much more rigorous physical security controls over the voted ballots and other election materials like the memory cards. We saw in 2020 that Georgia, just in practice, does not keep track of election materials on the whole. I'm sure that some counties do it better than others, but it's not done well on the whole. A really rigorous canvass, like most other states do, where you keep track of how many ballots were issued to a particular polling place, how many came back voted, spoiled, or unvoted. Rigorous chain of custody, better protocols around physical seals, logging seal numbers, et cetera. The chain of custody monitoring, as Marilyn said, just keeping track of what's going on. If you don't know how many ballots are out there, you have no idea what's going on. And on the whole, Georgia jurisdictions do not know how many ballots there are. They really should be cross-checking this against voter participation records, poll book reconciliation, and so on. If they do that, then there's a way to make an end run around most of the technology that's involved in the election to confirm that whatever might have gone wrong didn't change who won. But in order to do that, you have to have a trustworthy paper trail of the votes of the eligible voters who showed up. And currently, Georgia doesn't have that. It doesn't have it for a number of reasons. First and foremost, the requirement for universal use ballot marking devices for everybody who's voting in person. That basically amounts to a hackable pen, making the paper trail not a reliable record of what the voter actually expressed to the machine. Secondly, just the lack of ballot accounting, physical accounting, proper canvass, and so on. So at the end of the day, you don't know whether you've counted all the ballots, whether any ballots fell off a truck or any ballots fell on a truck. You just can't detect ballot box stuffing and other things with such lax procedures. If they tightened those things up, then they could make an end run around the tabulation to confirm that the reported winners really won by doing a proper audit, something like a risk limiting audit. Georgia has claimed to do a number of risk limiting audits in the past, but if you look more carefully at what they're doing, they're risk limiting audits in name only. They fail. They don't have the proper inputs for them to possibly limit the risk that an incorrect outcome will be certified. So they really need to tighten up their procedures around the audits as well. But they're dead in the water if they don't improve the reliability of the paper trail.
Susan Greenhalgh followed with this.
Georgia is a unique place because it requires everyone to vote on an electronic computerized ballot marking device to make that original record of their vote if they vote in person at the polling location. They are required to use a computer. And now that this software of the computers that are used to record that original record of the vote is out there, it makes it that much more dangerous because the original record can be compromised. In other states where the record is made by a pen and then counted by a machine, which could be attacked in some manner, you can always go back and count that paper ballot.
Okay, so I still have questions, and Susan is gracious enough to get on the phone to join us to answer any loose ends that we have. We'll provide as much of this information in the press briefing as is possible in today's show notes at ronshowatl.com. Sounding the alarm because it seems apparent, at least to me, that there isn't a whole lot of press coverage of this. And I get it. There's a lot of other stories this week. The October surprises are stacking up, but this is not an October surprise. This is a 4-year building surprise that isn't much of a surprise because the evidence has been there and it's been presented. And thankfully, folks like Free Speech for People and Coalition for Good Governance are all over it. But where is American media? Susan's up with us next.
I just want to reiterate that I think we can absolutely anticipate that the stolen software that we know was taken unlawfully in 2020, 2021, shared and analyzed, is going to very, very likely be used to challenge, subvert, or undermine the 2024 election.
That is the voice of Susan Greenhalgh, senior election integrity expert with Free Speech for People, from yesterday's press briefing via Zoom, laying out how definitively it has been proven that various voter software breaches, not just in Georgia, but in various swing states, can all be tied back to the Donald Trump 2020 campaign and could and likely will be used in the 2024 election cycle to create more doubt about results as they come out. Susan, thanks for joining the show this morning. First, I want to ask you this. This is just something that I don't know that anyone else would even bother to ask, but when I get on a Zoom call, I like to see who else is on it. And I noticed that you guys did this as a Zoom. What press entities actually even tuned in? Can you tell me that?
I don't know if I can tell you that. I feel like that might be, kind of a breach of protocol. I can say we had reporters from the biggest print newspapers nationally.
Okay.
And some other national outlets of different
I'm a little stunned. Usually they announce when they ask their questions at a press briefing.
But nobody. What was interesting is the reporters spoke to me afterwards.
Uh-huh.
So they did not make their identify themselves in a question, as you may have seen. So I did speak to some of the reporters, some of those national outlet reporters afterwards. But
I mean, you understand why I asked the question, though, right? Because I get the sense that this story isn't getting the coverage it deserves. I'm scanning the interwebs today to look for evidence of coverage of this press briefing, and I'm having a hard time finding it.
Yeah, I don't, I will say that I spoke extensively to a couple of reporters from important outlets, but the sense was there's a bigger building story, it wasn't going to be a story directly about the press briefing, if that makes sense. So it's not like informing a larger. And so there was gathering of a lot of information.
Fair enough. So I'm going to go back and review some of the audio from this press briefing. One question that I had that I'm not sure.
But can I go back to your other question and just say,
sure,
you are 100% right that there is far too little coverage of this issue. it is tremendous. It is extremely significant and serious. And there isn't the type of blanket press coverage that should be accompanying it, because there's been so much effort by people like the Secretary of State of Georgia to downplay it and minimize it. And so I think that unfortunately has a negative impact. But I'm hoping that the fact that Tina Peters was convicted and sentenced to 9 years, and I don't know if you heard the audio from that.
Yes, we shared it. That judge laid into
remarkable.
her. Yeah.
Really, yeah. And so that just illustrates that this is very serious. It is not it's not a tempest in a teapot. There needs to be more attention to it. So that's why we held the briefing, to try to focus that attention and get people recognizing that and thinking about it.
And unfortunately, you have two major natural disasters bookending, this revelation. We find out yesterday that Donald Trump sent a care package to Vladimir Putin and has been in communication since leaving office at least 7 times. I mean, there's just so many other headlines that this is like a blip on the radar, and that's what concerns me, that this story isn't getting the attention it deserves. And hopefully, at some point in time, the folks that did tune into your Zoom will utilize some of this. I think this is important and necessary information for the voter to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think part of this problem too is that we've seen a very spotty response from law enforcement addressing what could be criminal activity. I'm saying it that way because you can't make allegations, but we do know that the DA in Atlanta, Fonnie Willis, charged the activities in Coffee County, Georgia, as crimes and obtained 2 guilty pleas from that. So,
which is a question I was going to ask for later, but I'll go ahead and ask it now. Sure. Sidney Powell comes up a lot in this. If she's pled guilty and is cooperating or has vowed to cooperate, why can she not be used to sew this all together?
You when you say sew it all together, you mean
confirm it?
I mean, I honestly, I don't think we need her to confirm it. The paper trail is pretty extensive. We have her engaging the contract in Georgia. We have her signing the contract in Fulton County, Pennsylvania, where they breached the voting machines there, saying that it's going to be paid for by defending the Republic with her signature. We have records of her getting or directing the copies of the software being sent to all of the various people that we know are in this network, people like Doug Logan from the Arizona fake audit, Ben Cotton, who is continually showing up in different lawsuits to try to overturn elections and so forth. So there is a pretty strong paper trail sewing her all together. To get her to cooperate and say it would be nice, but but at the same time, there's already a whole bunch of evidence.
And if I can get the 75-second answer in this, because it's maybe complicated, and we'll have to take it to break. But why do you think there is a hesitancy at the federal level to investigate this? Is this a political timidity or what?
Yeah, I mean, everything I can say is speculation. I can only kind of guess. But I think there's a couple things at play here. So one, we saw that there was this incredible delay and hesitation at the Department of Justice to begin to look at certain parts of the plot to overturn the 2020 election, starting with Trump. And we know that Merrick Garland sat on it for a year or more before looking at that, building the case from the outside in or what have you. I think that that general approach and culture, if you want to call it that, is it has contributed. I think there was also a problem that that the first indication that we had that this was a coordinated plot that ties all these different states together came out of Georgia. And what you might typically see in something like this, where there's some sort of criminal activity that has implications for the whole country, is that the state AG would go to the FBI and talk at that level and say, hey, we see these potential crimes going on here. You guys need to look at this. And because the state AG has done such a inadequate job of addressing this, or worse than inadequate, we've failed to prosecute anybody that's involved caught on camera in Coffee County. The only prosecutions coming out of Fulton County. The local prosecutor isn't prosecuting anybody, which appears to be politically motivated. So you would normally get that sort of referral because government likes to talk to government, and they are more likely to listen from there. And so, because we're not getting any sort of instigation from the state law enforcement, and probably maybe they've gotten some pushback because we are seeing the Secretary of State constantly minimizing and dismissing it. So maybe that had something to do with it. Those are two, and I think also part of the problem that we didn't see this addressed in the January 6th committee. And we know that according to reporting, Jack Smith is using the January 6th committee report as a blueprint for how he is pursuing his prosecution. And that was just timing, because the January 6th committee took a lot of depositions of key people who were involved in this, like Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, before any of the news broke that tied them to the breaches. So they had their depositions taken like in May of 2022, and the whole the story that of what happened in Coffee County that started to expose the fact that Sidney Powell was the person that had hired and funded this breach, and then had coordinated with other people in other states, came out in August. And so, and if you recall, the January 6th committee had done a lot of hearings in the spring of 2022, took the summer off, and then came back to do one hearing with Cassidy Hutchinson. And then the midterms were upon us. And so Congress typically goes off to campaign because they're all up for re-election. So they didn't have that information to probe it at the time. So I think that is a part of the problem too, and that's just, that's bad luck. But that shouldn't stop you from going back and understanding what really happened.
Well, and you mentioned Congress going away to campaign, and we're dealing with that right now. Again, a natural disaster has just plagued Western North Carolina, parts of Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. And Florida's bracing for impact from what could be another Category 4 storm hitting its shores. And Congress doesn't have time to address the FEMA funding issue that they're politicizing, but they do have time to drag in Nathan Wade from the Fulton County prosecution team to Q&A him on his relationship with Fani Willis. And then you have the state election board doing everything they can to nitpick about, the various little things that do come up that are statistically insignificant in a major election cycle, but are playing the nothing to see here card with regard to the breaches that you guys are trying to bring attention to.
Yes, I can't argue with anything you just said.
I'm just blown away by it all. I just really am. Listen, I appreciate that you guys put this press briefing together, and I know, maybe the major media and the print media aren't going to use a lot of this data from yesterday or audio. I'm all over it today. One, I like to just get audio because it makes my job so much easier. But when you guys do such a succinct job, it's just easy to lay out the story in a way that a simpleton like me can even understand. Even if I do have to call you back and say, hey, Susan, I still have questions. Thank you so much for being so available to help me tie up any of the loose ends. I do appreciate that. Susan Greenhall with the with Free Speech for People. Thank you for joining the Ron Show this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Seeing this all brought to light, seeing this all litigated, seeing people actually pay the price for committing crimes to try and overturn elections, all on the ballot in 4 weeks. Now you know why this is such an important story for us. I want to thank Susan Greenhall not only for joining the show here in the last few minutes, but also for being up early to provide the link to the Google Drive that had this press briefing. I couldn't make it. The press release came a little late for me, and I'm busy doing other things, trying to make a living out of residential real estate. Anyway, thank her so much for joining the show and for providing all the information. We'll have the show notes and the Ware County letter that they sent as well. RonShowATL.com. Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. on America One Radio, 5 to 6 p.m. as well, and 7 to 8 at Progressive Voices. Catch you tomorrow.